Moody's. See Outlook. Stable. The economy of Venezuela is based primarily on petroleum and has been in a state of total economic collapse since 2013. Venezuela is the 8th largest member of OPEC and 26th in the world by oil production. Since the 1920s, Venezuela has been a rentier state, offering oil as its main export. The nation has experienced hyperinflation since 2015. In 2014, total trade amounted to 48.1% of the country's GDP. Exports accounted for 16.7% of GDP and petroleum products accounted for about 95% of those exports. From the 1950s to the early 1980s, the Venezuelan economy experienced a steady growth that attracted many immigrants, with the nation enjoying the highest standard of living in Latin America. During the collapse of oil prices in the 1980s, the economy contracted. The currency commenced a progressive devaluation and inflation skyrocketed to reach peaks of 84% in 1989 and 99% in 1996. 3 years prior to Hugo Chavez taking office, Venezuela manufactures and exports heavy industry products such as steel, aluminum and cement. Production is concentrated around Ciudad Guayana, near the Juri Dam, one of the largest dams in the world and the provider of about 3/4 of Venezuela's electricity. Other notable manufacturing includes electronics and automobiles as well as beverages and foodstuffs. Agriculture in Venezuela accounts for approximately 4.7% of GDP, 7.3% of the labor force and at least 1/4 of Venezuela's land area. Venezuela exports rice, corn, fish, tropical fruit, coffee, pork and beef. Venezuela has an estimated at $14.3 trillion worth of natural resources and is not self-sufficient in most areas of agriculture. In spite of strained relations between the two countries, the United States has been Venezuela's most important trading partner. American exports to Venezuela have included machinery, agricultural products, medical instruments and cars. Venezuela is one of the top 4 suppliers of foreign oil to the United States. About 500 American companies are represented in Venezuela. According to Central Bank of Venezuela, between 1998 and 2008 the government received around $325 billion United States dollars through oil production and exports in general. According to the International Energy Agency, the production of 2.4 million barrels per day supplied 500,000 barrels to the United States. Since the Bolivarian Revolution half dismantled its PDVSA oil giant corporation in 2002 by firing most of its 20,000-strong dissident professional human capital and imposed stringent currency controls in 2003 in an attempt to prevent capital flight. There has been a decline in oil production and exports and a series of stern currency devaluations. Further yet, price controls, expropriation of numerous farmlands and various industries, among other disputable government policies including a near-total freeze on any access to foreign currency at reasonable official exchange rates, have resulted in severe shortages in Venezuela and steep price rises of all common goods, including food, water, household products, spare parts, tools and medical supplies, forcing many manufacturers to either cut production or close down, with many ultimately abandoning the country as has been the case with several technological firms and most automobile makers. In 2015, Venezuela had over 100% inflation, the highest in the world and the highest in the country's history at that time. According to independent sources, the rate increased to 80,000% at the end of 2018, with Venezuela spiraling into hyperinflation while the poverty rate was nearly 90% of the population. On the 14th of November 2017, credit rating agencies declared that Venezuela was in default with its debt payments, with Standard & Poor's categorizing Venezuela as being in selective default. After oil was discovered in Venezuela in 1922 during the Maracaibo strike, Venezuela's dictator Juan Vicente Gómez allowed American oil companies to write Venezuela's petroleum law. In 1943, Standard Oil of New Jersey accepted a new agreement in Venezuela based on the 50-50 principle, described as a landmark event. Even more favorable terms were negotiated in 1945, after a coup brought to power a left-leaning government that included Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso. From the 1950s to the early 1980s, the Venezuelan economy, which was buoyed by high oil prices, was one of the strongest and most prosperous in South America. The continuous growth during that period attracted many immigrants. In 1958, a new government, again including Pérez Alfonso, devised a plan for an international oil cartel that would become OPEC. In 1973, Venezuela voted to nationalize its oil industry effective 1 January 1976. With Petróleos de Venezuela presiding over a number of holding companies. In subsequent years, Venezuela built a vast refining and marketing system in the United States and Europe. During Pérez Jiménez's dictatorship from 1952 to 1958, Venezuela enjoyed remarkably high GDP growth. So,